Hi Siri,
Yes.
please read the news for me today.
Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old doc brings World War I soldiers to life in glorious color. Peter Jackson has taken filmgoers to many exotic worlds. From Lord of the Rings to this month's Mortal Engines.
What is that? That is London.
But one of the most unusual places he may have taken viewers is a century into our own past, among the suddenly very lively soldiers of his native New Zealand, amid the meat grinder of World War I. Jackson wrote and directed They Shall Not Grow Old, which excavates and transforms early, jerky, black and white film footage into something like a modern-day documentary in full color and sound.
I was 16 years old and my father allowed me to go.
The film debuted in the UK and New Zealand last month. On Remembrance Day, the US calls it Veterans Day, the centennial of the war's end. The film debuts tonight in the United States, in special theater screenings nationwide through Fathom Events, with a second evening of screenings on December 27th. Jackson's own grandfather was part of New Zealand's World War I Army, and the Jackson family home had plenty of books and other memorabilia about the war when he was growing up. Heading into the centennial of World War I's 1914 beginning, England's Imperial War Museum approached Jackson to create some unique project built around more than 2,200 hours of film footage the museum had. He settled on restoring and updating about 100 hours some of that 100-year-old footage so that it looked like a modern-day film. Speeding up the hand-cranked footage to a modern 24 frames per second, then converting it all into 3D format. In putting together the project, Jackson said he eventually decided this should just be an average man's experience of what it was like to be an infantry soldier in World War I. He said in a written interview from his longtime studio, "Warner Brothers, what these guys are describing are things that my grandfather or anybody's grandfather or great-grandfather would have experienced. This film will give you an insight into their lives." The film is somewhat similar to Soldiers' Stories, a 2014 documentary short by Oscar-winning producer Nick Reed, The Lady in Room 6, and director Jonathan Kitson. That project was built around restored stereoscopic stills taken by British, French, German and American soldiers in World War I. The filmmakers used a lot of the Ken Burns effect and stitched stills together to create an entire 3D film short, with voiceovers by U.S. veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. That film went on to a lengthy run at the U.S. Infantry Museum at Fort Benning. Jackson's project required 2.5 years of restoration work, followed by another year of production, said Aaron Perry, EVP and Chief Creative Officer for Stereod, a 3D post-production company owned by Deluxe that worked on the project. Perry, speaking at last week's On the Lot conference at Paramount Pictures in Los Angeles, said Jackson was exacting when it came to recreating the correct colors of the era's uniforms, gear, battlefields and neighborhoods, down to the actual brickwork on walls and footage shot in a small French village. He photographed green countrysides once torn apart by years of brutal trench warfare, then sent those reference images to the specialists working on color grading to ensure the resulting images were authentic. "One of the things we spent a lot of time on was what does mud look like," Perry said. Jackson made them the film's colorists put on the uniforms, go out in the sun and look at them. It was an amazing forensic adventure. After a lengthy film restoration process led by Park Road post-production, Jackson said, "What really hits you is the humanity of the people on the film. They just jump out at you, especially the faces. They're no longer buried in a fog of film grain and scratches and shuddering and sped-up footage. You just understand that these were human beings. I realized that this movie is about bringing these people back into our lives again." After restoring the images, Jackson decided he needed authentic audio too. The museum was able to provide about 600 hours of recorded interviews with 250 to 300 World War I veterans. He also hired professional lip readers to recapture what soldiers were saying in the original footage, and used actors speaking in the appropriate regional accents to recreate that dialogue. Park Road Post, which had won an Oscar for its sound work on Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, helped put it all together into a seamless, transporting film from another world. We wanted the full gamut of sounds, from the wind in the trees, to footsteps in the mud, to the jangle of the equipment, to the click-clack of the rifle bolts, to the horse hoods and the squeak of the leather, subtleties upon subtleties, dozens and dozens of soundtracks of different sounds, all built up onto one shot, Jackson said. That extensive post-production audio work isn't that far from the many-layered post-production work required in even modern films. But for century-old silent footage, it helped bring the restored visual images further to life. You begin to understand that it wasn't a war of hatred, Jackson said. It was a war where these two groups of men were told that they had to go and fight each other, and I would imagine that no one there would really be able to tell you what they were fighting for. One thing we gathered is that the British soldiers felt that the German soldiers were in the same position as them. They were eating the same horrible food, living in the same terrible conditions, so there was a mutual sympathy between those two sides. They didn't hate each other, I think they felt that they were both equally victims. Things like that certainly surprised me a lot.
There was a job to be done, and you just got on and did it.